let's start the next session with talking about multimedia journalism and what it is that you're going to do on this course, or this workshop, should I say, how it fits in a broader context of where we are with multimedia journalism right now. I'd like to start with this image as an illustration of a fact that people often think that multimedia journalism is something that's new. But it's actually something that's been happening for a long time, mainly since the invention of the high-8 camera, where photojournalists back in the 1990s, like myself, started to shoot video as well as shooting stills. And back in those days, I was working with almost the identical kit. The one difference, I had a wide lens, I have a long lens. It's still how I always work, 2 camera bodies. The difference is that the video camera has actually gone inside the DSLR camera that we're using. But essentially, the practice of working in multiple visual formats is not something that is new. So I call myself a multimedia journalist. And when I do that, often I get a sort of mixed reaction. And we had this conversation with Salim over lunch that multimedia journalism is something that is very difficult to define. I think you've written an MA thesis on it, and many other people have sort of grappled with the idea of what is multimedia journalist. But I like to sort of start with what is a multimedia journalist, because that's what I am, and I need to kind of understand who I am and what I do. Now, in my practice as a trainer, as somebody who goes around to different media organizations who's brought in as a consultant, one of the things that I've realized is that the department of multimedia in a traditional media, TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, is actually the department of everything else. That is, in a newspaper, it's often video because they have photographers and they have writers. So the multimedia department are the people that make video. In a TV station where I'm now working, the multimedia department is mainly writers. We've hired 40 new multimedia journalists recently, and pretty well all of them are writers, because the TV station already has visual journalists and very good at visual storytelling, but they don't have text, and as they go online, they need different things. So the multimedia department has become very different in different media organizations, the same with radio stations. And the other thing is that the citizen, as we talk a lot about the citizen journalist, has also changed the kind of perspective. And the way that I like to see it is the citizen journalist more as a citizen reporter. As one of the things that is now apparent is that if an event happens, that we're going to have multiple people taking pictures of that event, purely from the fact that everyone's carrying cameras around in their pockets, something that I'm sure you know a lot about. But what they're effectively doing is not journalism. They are reporting a fact. They're reporting what they see. They see the plane go down in the Hudson River. They take a photograph and they upload it. They say this is something that's happened, but they don't know why. And something that I think the journalist does, in my definition of multimedia journalism, is the journalist is the person that actually asks the why question. And our role has increasingly been more about doing the in-depth reporting behind the news stories rather than just taking the images of things as it happens, because that is being done so well by people who are there. So I go in the wrong direction. Okay, so there are 3 major changes. This comes from Clay Shirky from the New York University. 3 major changes in what has happened as we've moved from those traditional platforms, radio, television, and print, into the digital space, to what I call digital pages. The first is that we've changed our structure from the one to many. The one newspaper who have the power to buy the print press and to deliver the news out to the masses. It was a one-way negotiation, one-way communication. And now we're in this realm of the many to many, something that is very difficult to get your head around. But the idea is that anybody can be this central publisher just with a computer or even a mobile phone now, and they can send out to a small network of people who then, if they like it, they'll send it out to their networks. and we have this concept of the viral news where it starts spreading. But it gives the power, the opportunity for people to do that. This is a diagram I did on the plane coming here to try to explain to the TV station where I'm now worked, is how things are different. And this is the way that the TV station is currently working in the old media section. And I'm trying to describe to them how we need to work with media partners to find connected networks that exist already and play into them and let them spread what we do. Second thing is that the digital devices that we consume our media, that is phones, tablets, computers, also have the capability to create media. So the places where people read the news, if they're reading the New York Times on their New York Times app or New York Times website on their phone, they have the ability to also create media and send it back to the New York Times. And this has brought about this concept of trying to create communities where you want somebody, if they see the plane go down in the Hudson River, if they're a New York Times reader, you want them to send a picture of the plane going down in the Hudson River back to the New York Times. And the way they do that is they do it using the same app that they've used to consume news. And this is a really different way of thinking, which a lot of the old media has found it difficult to get their heads around. That we're now in a place where the place where we put our media, and this goes for you guys too, when you do your projects, the places where your media will appear will be on devices where people can respond with media, not just with a comment or a letter or email or whatever. They can create video and visual media and send it back to you as well, or send it into the community. Something worth considering. The third thing, and the third major difference, is that for the first time on a digital page, the digital page can show all media. In traditional media, we were stuck in print with photography, static graphics, and text. On TV, we're stuck with video, and radio, we're stuck with audio. But on these new pages, all media is possible. Everything, any type of media, we can put into the same page. Okay, let me try and illustrate that. So this is a story from back in September. I was doing a workshop similar to this, but in Malaysia with Asian journalists, all writers. And we were doing it on Langkawi, which is this beautiful island in Malaysia. And we came from Kuala Lumpur. We got off the plane in Langkawi. The bus took us to the hotel. Everyone came off the bus. We all came into the foyer, and there's this beautiful scene in front of us as the water sort of, there's an open foyer, open reception area of the hotel. But what everyone did, bearing in mind these are all writers, is that they didn't rush to the souvenir shop and buy a postcard and start writing about this beautiful scene, is they all naturally picked up their phones, took a photograph, and shared it. Why? Because photography was the natural means of telling that story when all media is possible. I like to tell the story of going to a party. This is how I like to illustrate it best. If you're going to go to a party, say, of people you were at school with, and you haven't seen them for a long time, before you go to the party, you will probably share that news on Facebook, on Twitter, or whichever social network you use, with text. You will tell people, I'm going to that party. Why? Because text is the most natural way of telling people that you're going to a party. You don't have any other form of media to spread that news. But when you get to the party and you see an old friend, and you say, oh, you know, I've not seen you for a while, you're kind of sniggering to yourself because he's put on a bit of weight, and you take a photograph, and you then send that up to your social network, to Facebook or Twitter or wherever. Why? Because photography is the most natural means of telling that piece of information to your other friends, of spreading it. Later on, maybe you have a few too many drinks and people start doing funny dance. Somebody gets up on the table and starts doing a funny dance. You pick up your phone and you shoot video. Because video is probably the best way of communicating that particular action. So we naturally gravitate to the most natural form of communication when all forms are possible. And this, again, is something that's been very hard to impress on traditional journalists who always think that I am a photographer, I'm a writer. Going back to the Malaysia workshop, the next morning when I started with a photography session, their reaction to me was, we're not photographers, we're writers. You know, that's not something that we do. And yet, when they wanted to tell their friends about this beautiful place they arrived, they didn't write, they took pictures, because that in the social space, that was something that they did naturally. But at the workplace, they suddenly had a different way of thinking. And that, again, is something that you might want to consider in the multimedia space, about how you try to embrace some of the other media types in order to tell your stories.